Alright guys, I'm going to show you how to start creating the colorful portraits like you see here in the Shepard Fairey style using the stamp effect and your blob brush to create all these different layers of color. Hopefully by now you have already created your color schemes from adobecolor.com and you have your people picked out with the words that you think can describe those three people. And now you're going to go find the picture that you want to use for the portrait. So I'm going to start with my last person, Audrey Hepburn. And now when you go to search for pictures, you want to make sure that you're finding really large pictures. So down here in the number, if you hover over any picture in here, you'll see there's a number that comes up, and those numbers represent the amount of pixels per part of the picture. So you want to make sure those numbers are about 1,000 or higher. And a way to make sure you're only getting those large pictures is if in your top part up here in your search bar, you click on where it says Tools, and then over where yours is, it would say Any Size, and then change that to Large. And what you'll see is that it changes. So if I'm on Any Size, I have all these ones that are down in the low numbers, like 296 by 445, and some other really low number ones. So I want to make sure I'm only getting high number ones. So if I go to Tools, Size, and then Large, it will start filtering it by that number. And then you can start picking your picture. So when you look for a picture, you want to find one where you can see the person's entire face and it doesn't have any of this writing over the top of their face. So while this one is a really good close-up portrait of her, we're missing the top of her head, and that might look a little bit funny for our portrait that we're doing. And then one like this is really far away. So even though it's 800 by 1,000, it's really far away, and we want something a little more close up on her face. So I found this one that is almost 2,000 by 2,500. And it's still a little far away, but it has a really good view of her face, and it's really good lighting. It's not super dark on any side, and it's really not overly light. Like on this one, you'll see her face is just really overly bright. So we want one that has a decent amount of shading like you see here. So when you find that one, you're gonna right click and then go to Save Image As, not Copy Image, but Save Image As. And when you do that Save Image As, it's gonna pop up just like it does from Illustrator, and you just want to save it to the desktop, or I'm sorry, to your folder on the desktop, and give it a name, because you'll notice when it comes up it's a bunch of numbers. And then you want to go ahead and check that the format down here is listed as something like JPEG or PNG or JPG. If it says anything else down there, then your picture's not going to work. So if that comes up, then you just have to pick a new picture. So after you have that in the right place, go ahead and hit save. Mine's asking me if I want to replace because I think I already have one named Audrey on the desktop. And then go back into your Illustrator. So now in your document, you only have one artboard, and I want to add a second one so I can start working on this portrait. To do that, you're going to go to Window, and then Artboards, and it'll come up somewhere on the side. And all you have to do is click this button down here with a page turn for a new artboard, and it will set a new artboard for you. And then you can click on those arrows to get rid of that panel. Now, I don't want these to be so close together, so I'm going to move them using my artboard tool over here. And all I have to do is click on that artboard tool and then drag my artboard however far away I want it to be to give myself just a little more space. So now it's time to put my picture on here. To do that, I'm going to go to File, Place. You can also use the keyboard code Command-Shift-P. And then I'm going to find that picture I put on there, Audrey. Easy to find because I saved her name. And then I'm going to place her here. So I want to resize this a little bit because I don't want all this extra part of her. So I'm going to go to the corner and hold Shift. You always want to hold Shift when you're resizing a photo. You don't want to do any of this stuff to them where they get super skinny or super fat because that messes up their proportions. So what I'm doing is I'm just making sure she fits inside this artboard, and I don't need any of this extra stuff, right? I don't need her shoulder or the rest of her body down here. I only need really from like her shoulder, collarbone area and up. So I can even lower this down a little bit more and hold Shift and make her a little bit bigger. So that way just her head really is taking up that whole part of the artboard. Now, before I do the next thing, I want to have 2 more copies of this photo exactly this size because I'm doing 3 colors total. So I'm just going to hold Alt on my keyboard and drag out 2 more copies so that I have 3 total, 1 for each color that I'm going to put on her portrait. So I'm going to click on her picture again, and then I'm going to go up to Effect in the top menu bar, Sketch, and then down to Stamp. And what that's going to do is it's going to enter us into another window. I can zoom out so I can see her. And I just want to look at her face. I don't really care about what's happening in the background back here or any part of her body. And I'm going to mess with this light-dark balance. So what you're looking for on your first layer is you want a decent amount of black. Now, you obviously don't want it all black. And even at 49 right here, you'll see it's really covering a lot of her features. If I bump it down to 48, see how much more it drastically takes off. So that's about half of her face in color, and that's in black, I'm sorry. And that's more of what we're going for. Now this smoothness you can kind of drag out too, but you don't want it to get too smooth where it starts losing all of its character. So I like to keep that smoothness down near about anything less than 5 really is okay. I'm going to have mine set down to about 1 though, just because I like it better there. So once you have that and you think you have about half of her color in shadow or in that black, you can hit OK. And you'll see it changes that entire picture into being that form. And I still have 2 that haven't been touched. So now I'm ready to start doing my color. So I'm going to zoom in so I can see her. And now I'm going to start doing my painting. What you're going to do is you want to click and hold on your paintbrush tool, and you want to get to your blob brush. Now your blob brush is different than your paintbrush because when your blob brush paints, it's going to paint and create a shape. So let me show you the difference. If I paint with my blob brush, so if I come down here, if I paint with my blob brush like this, when I let go, you see how those blue dots and the blue line is all the way around the outside of that form that I made? That's creating it a shape, right? These are all anchor points that I can then move and adjust the edge of that shape. Whereas if I paint with just my paintbrush, not only does it automatically go super skinny, but it's one whole line. So even if I make that a thicker line, you notice how the blue is right in the middle, and I can't adjust any of the edges. If I want to adjust this edge, I can't adjust that. I can adjust where the line goes, but I can't adjust the edge. So you want to make sure that when you're painting, it has a line around the outside, not through the middle. To do that, you click and hold on that paintbrush and get your blob brush tool. Now the really cool thing about your blob brush is you can change the way the brush looks. So right now you can see it's just a perfect circle. And I can adjust that by double clicking on it in my toolbar here. And this menu will pop up. And now I can adjust multiple settings. So I can make it a little bit more angled, and you see it's showing you a preview here. I can change how big it is. I can change the angle or the direction that it's on. And then I can also change that roundness again, so keeping it a perfect circle or making it super thin. I like mine being kind of somewhere in the middle in there. And now I'm gonna get my eyedropper tool, and I'm going to pick up my color. So this is my Audrey Hepburn line. And I'm going to pick up my lightest color. You always want the lightest color to go in the back. And now I'm just going to start painting over all of the black. So when I paint, I click and drag. And if I let go, it's going to start leaving that shape. And then I can come in here and just keep painting around it. And I'm trying to be as okay as I can be on the edges, but it's never going to be totally perfect. And we're going to go back and erase it afterwards. Now, I can adjust my size without going into that menu again by holding my bracket keys. So the left bracket right next to the letter P on your keyboard can help make that brush smaller. And then the right bracket next to that one, kind of almost underneath the delete key, is what's going to make it get a little bit larger. So you're just going to work your way all the way around. And I keep changing my size as I'm working because I want it to try and cover as much area as I can. I don't want it to be super tedious. It's going to be a little tedious, but at this layer, because it's so much black, I don't need it to be perfectly exact on all of the lines. That's for the last layer where I have the least amount of black on my page. So I'm using the bracket keys and making it smaller when I need to get into smaller areas. And I'm trying to be mostly exact. I'm obviously going over on a lot of parts, so in this part here. And I'm making sure I come down into here and into the neck and getting all of this area down here because you don't want your portrait to just be a floating head. That really doesn't look very nice when giving it that detail. Now, I don't have to be anywhere near as exact down here, but you also want to pay attention to the edge of the artboard. So because my photo goes so much further than the artboard does, I don't want to have to paint any more than I have to. So you can see this black line right here that's going around the edge, that's my artboard edge. So I don't need to paint any more of that because I'm already, if nothing outside that artboard is going to show. So I don't need to paint anymore. So I have my first layer of her done. Now I want to go in and kind of clean up some of this stuff. So in order to do that, I'm going to click on that green and make sure you click on all parts. So notice this part is just kind of floating by itself. I'm going to hold shift and click on that extra part. You can also go into select same and then fill color or fill and stroke, and it'll select everything on your page. That's that same green color, but it does include your palette over here. So if you hold shift and click on that, you can get out of it. And now I only have this part. And I'm going to lower my opacity up here in the top. Opacity is how opaque something is. So I'm going to lower it down to 50. And you can see now I can see through it. And if I zoom back in, I can see all those places where I went over. So now I'm going to, oops, move my portrait. Now I'm going to use my eraser tool. So it's right underneath that blob brush. And your eraser tool has the same thing. If I double click on it, I can adjust the angle. I can adjust the roundness. I can adjust the size. All of that I can adjust with that. Double clicking in it. And then I can just go back into that shape that I'm on. Make sure you have it selected. So when I'm erasing, I want to make sure that I can see all of these, I can see all those anchor points up. I don't want to be erasing and not see anchor points because that means you're erasing stuff underneath it. So when I have that selected, I'm just going to go through with my eraser tool and kind of just like I did with the paintbrush tool, but now being a little bit more careful. And I'm going to erase wherever that extra went over. So like here in her eyebrow. And the places you want to be the most completely exact are around their face because that's how we recognize people. So if it's a little sloppy, like in her ears or in their hair, stuff like that is fine. But if you're sloppy around features like their mouth, like I was down here, or their nose, which I really was up here, that's where it's going to be more problematic because we want to make sure that we can easily tell who your person is. And if you're sloppy with it, that's not going to give you as much detail. I can change the size of my eraser just like I did with my blob brush by using those bracket tools right next to the P on the keyboard. And I'm just going through piece by piece and erasing that stuff where I can kind of see through it a little bit to that background. And now you'll notice that mine is super speckly. There's all these black specks kind of all around at the edge of the shading, and I'm just kind of ignoring those. If they're together in a big clump, like right, kind of in here, you can paint those. But if they're just kind of speckled like in through here, then I don't need those to be a part of the design because it's not a very significant amount into here. So you'll notice here where all these speckles come together. I'm going to leave that there because it's giving me some shading. But I don't need to erase it super specifically like I do in here. And if you erase too far, so like, oops, I erased into it, Command Z, just like always, to undo it. And you just want to move yourself around. You don't need to zoom in super specifically. If you zoom in too far, you'll notice that it has all of these like rigid edges, like in here where it gets super boxy. You don't need to be super specific with that. I don't need to zoom in and get every little ridge, but what I want to make sure I'm getting is the general outline of stuff, right? So you want to make sure that color is in the general space. And then especially for their hair, it does not have to be super exact as long as the general, oops, took off way too much, the general head shape is right. So you'll notice I was taking off way too much of her hair, so I'm going to go back and put that back. And then as you're working, you can adjust those angles of your brush and whatever. So like I need this to go this way, I can just make that a little bit smaller. And this is just kind of where the light is hitting her hair. So it doesn't have to be super overly exact. As long as, like I said, by those facial features, especially the eyes, it's all really nice and precise. And remember, you want that blue line to be up. You don't want it to be erasing and you not see those blue anchor point lines, because if you're erasing and you don't see those blue anchor point lines, when we get further into the layers, that means you're erasing layers that are underneath it, and we really don't want that to happen because it defeats the purpose of having all the different colors to show that part of their face. So same in here with all these speckles. I'm going to leave those because I like the detail it's giving. And down here in the neck, I'm just going to erase that edge so that way I can get it as close to exact as I can around her neck in here. And then I put this extra thing here with all those speckles there just so that it had a little bit of extra added design right there to show that collarbone area on her. That's just a choice that I made for design-wise. So once I think I've erased everything that needs to be erased, I'm going to zoom back out and make sure I've selected everything that's the same color. So select same fill color. It selects everything, and then that opacity I want to turn back up to 100. That's really important, but you turn it back up to 100. And then I'm going to click on this picture back here and just press delete. So that's my first layer of color. So what I do now is take one of my extra pictures and line it up. And it's hard, sometimes a little hard to get it exact, but what you want to do is line it up just so that way it's almost perfect. I watch that edge of the nose because you can easily tell if that nose is too far because her eye starts looking out. But it helps you get that perfect amount of shadow right underneath it. And then if I go down too far, her hairline starts showing again. So just trying to get that near perfect, not completely perfect. And then I'm going to bring it to the front. Right click, arrange, bring to front. So it's in front of it. That green layer is still underneath it. So I'm going to go to Effect, Sketch, and Stamp. And it should remember for me the exact level I was on last time. So you don't have to remember this number. It took me right back to being on 48. So this time her face, last time, her face was about half in darkness. We want it to only be about a third in darkness. So when you start sliding it down, you'll notice that black goes away. And you don't want to be all the way down here yet, right? This is kind of the last layer. We want it to be somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to have mine kind of up near, probably right around 35, 36-ish. And remember, I was up here at 48 before. So all of this eyes over here, I couldn't see any detail in this part of her face. So when I slide it down to 35, I get this whole eye comes in and her nose and her mouth, but I'm still in shadow over here. So that's really helpful for me to know how much detail I still have to show. So after that, I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to click on my next color. So I want my medium level color. So I already used this one. So I'm going to be on this one now. So with my eyedropper tool, I'm going to pick up that color and then get my Blob Brush tool and zoom in and just start painting away. And you want to paint everything that's black. Now with this layer, notice I'm being super sloppy because I'm going to go back in and really erase stuff this time instead of trying to paint it perfectly. I'm going to spend a lot of time on my eraser. But what you're looking for is to give it that kind of detail. So remember, after you paint it all in, you click on it and go to your opacity. And I like to bring it down to about 50. And then get that eraser tool and make sure that those blue lines are still up so that you can erase it and it'll only erase that layer to get all of that perfect detail. And you just work through it and do this for each layer and you're going to be super exact with it. And then you would keep going. So that's my level 2 one. And then when you do your third level of color, that last one, if I go to Effect, Sketch, and Stamp for that last one, it's going to be your least amount of black that's there. So mine, I come down to level 1, it's really kind of sketchy up through here and I don't have a lot of lip detail. So if I start bringing it back up a little bit, I get a little bit more of that in. So I'm going to be right around 5 is usually a good place to be. So my first one was a 45 or higher. My second one was between like 25 and 40 normally is a good range. And then my last one is down here under 10. And then once that one comes out, you just click OK, and then you would start tracing through that one after you finish this one. So eventually what you'll get to is having 3 really vivid shades of color. So when I zoom in, you can see that this green one, this hot green one, really took up a majority of her face, right? It's coming through all in here to show that level. And then my second stage is still a lot of that middle green. It's covering up a lot of her eyes. And then that dark green, the last color that's there, is where all the detail is. I really can see her nose and her lips and her eyes. I can see all of that in here. So with each picture, you have to go through all those steps, right? We want to make sure we find a really large file picture. You want to make sure those pixels are 1,000 or higher, and then put them into your document and start painting them with your blob brush, changing its size and angle over here, and then using that eraser to erase through when it has that opacity change. And all three should be in one big document. So that's how you create your portraits, and eventually you should have 3 portraits. Mine has a word, revolutionary, that's stretching across all 3. So keep in mind where that word's going to go and how it's going to look and how these pictures form together. So mine has one portrait looking over to the left, one looking over to the right, and then Audrey in the middle looking forward. So think about how those relate to each other when you're picking your pictures and when they're working together. So that way you can create the best kind of portraits that you need, and always sticking to that color scheme that you started with.